A warm wind moved across the tall summer grass, carrying the dry scent of dust, pine resin, and old memories. The cabin stood alone at the edge of the clearing, leaning as if it carried the weight of years. Its roof sagged in the middle, boards warped, windows broken, and the doorway swallowed by shadows. Folks in the nearest town whispered that no one had lived there since the flood swept through many seasons ago. Travelers passed by quickly, saying the place held bad spirits and sorrow. But to the lone Apache man walking toward it, the cabin was not a place of fear. It was where he intended to take his final breath. His steps were slow, heavy, and purposeful. The scars on his shoulders caught the sunlight like thin lines of silver. He was tall, strong, and built like a warrior who had once stood proudly under open skies, but his eyes no longer held that fire. He carried no rifle, no bundle of supplies, only a small pouch of herbs, flint, and water. Those who saw him leave camp believed he had gone to scout for game or ride toward the mountains. He told no one his true purpose. He had lived through too many battles, too many losses, and too many broken promises made between nations. His heart felt worn not from age, but from carrying the weight of memories that cut deeper than any wound. He reached the porch of the abandoned cabin and paused. The wood cracked softly under his feet. The place smelled of damp earth, forgotten summers, and loneliness. This land once belonged to settlers who raised cattle and cut fresh timber from the ridge. Now the wood was gray, almost lifeless. He stood there in silence, staring at the doorway, listening to the wind move through the trees like distant drums. He had not come to fight, nor to live as he once had. He had come to find rest, to lay down the final pieces of himself, where no one would remember his name. The world had changed too fast around him. The frontier was no longer wild. Horses had been replaced by iron tracks, rifles by machines, and the wide plains by fences that seemed to choke the earth. He felt like a spirit watching his own time fade away. He lowered himself to sit on a log near the steps, staring at the mountains. The sky stretched wide and endless. In that stillness, he closed his eyes and whispered a quiet prayer asking for peace. He planned to stay here alone, long enough to let the last pieces of life fade into the soil. He believed he had nothing left to offer the world, and nothing left the world could offer him. Hours passed quietly. Birds fluttered through tall weeds, and sunlight shifted across the clearing. Then something changed. A sound, faint and trembling, drifted from inside the cabin. He opened his eyes slowly, unsure if he imagined it. The wind died down, leaving silence thick and unsettled. Another sound followed, softer this time, almost like sobbing. His brow tightened, not with fear, but confusion. He rose to his feet and stepped closer. The doorway was dark, and he stood just inches from it, breathing slow. He believed the cabin to be empty, abandoned, forgotten by time. But the sound came again, this time clearer, like a child trying not to cry aloud. He pushed the door open a little, letting sunlight press into the gloom. Dust particles floated like tiny spirits in the air. Old furniture leaned against broken walls, and a tangle of blankets lay in one corner. When the man stepped inside, he expected a wounded animal, or perhaps nothing at all. Instead, a small figure moved deeper in the shadows. He stood still and waited. He did not call out. His voice had not spoken to another soul in days, and he did not know if he wanted to change that. Slowly, the figure stepped into the light. It was a young girl, frail, pale, barefoot. She wore a simple white dress, wrinkled and dirty, as if she had been wandering in the woods for days. Her hair was tangled, her hands shaking, and her eyes wide with fear. She pressed herself against the wall as if she expected harm. He did not move closer. He simply stared, taken aback by the sight. The last thing he expected to find in a forgotten cabin was a child. Her voice came out uneven, barely more than a whisper. She asked him not to hurt her. The words were desperate, but she did not try to run. She looked exhausted, like someone who had reached the end of her strength. He raised his empty hands slowly, showing her he held no weapon, that he had no reason to fight. He had come here to die quietly, not to harm anyone. The girl looked at him with cautious eyes, studying his face and the worn beads around his neck. She seemed unsure whether he was a threat or a blessing. The way she clung to the doorway made it clear she had been alone for a long time. Yet something deeper shone in her eyes, something that felt strangely familiar to him. She too seemed lost in this world, carrying sorrow she was too young to understand. He wondered how she ended up here. Her dress suggested she came from a farming family, maybe from the valley or the town beyond the ridge. No tracks led to the cabin except his own. No horse outside. No sign of a wagon. She could not have survived here long without help. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the wind rustling the grass outside and the creaking of the old cabin walls. The Apache man felt something shift inside him, something he did not expect. The place he came to die had suddenly given him a decision to make, one that pulled him away from his plan. The girl finally stepped out of the shadows, closer to the doorway. Her legs trembled, and her fingers clutched the fabric of her dress. The world outside was bright, but she stayed close to the darkness, as if still afraid to leave it. She looked at him again, eyes glossy with tears, and asked why he came here. He did not answer right away. He simply turned his face toward the mountains, feeling the weight of the question press against his heart in a way he had not allowed for a long time. Maybe he did not know the answer anymore. His plan had been simple, quiet, final. But now the world stood between what he intended and what might still be waiting for him. The girl watched him in silence, and the wind began to rise again, pushing the tall grass in slow waves. Somewhere beyond the trees, the distant echo of riders seemed to stir as if fate was on the move. Tightening its hold, he had come here to let life end. Instead, life had stepped out of the shadows to meet him. He stood there, unable to walk away, realizing he might not be as alone in this world as he thought, and just as he turned back toward her, something rustled in the woods behind him, breaking the fragile stillness, forcing him to brace himself for whatever was coming next. The sound in the woods came again, sharper this time, as if branches were being broken under hurried footsteps. The Apache man instinctively shifted his stance, not aggressive, but ready. His body remembered battles even if his heart no longer wanted them. He listened to the trees, waiting for the noise to repeat. The girl flinched and stepped backward, her hands rising to cover her ears. The man glanced toward her, noticing how she shrank at the slightest sound, like a wild animal expecting harm. Whatever she remembered before reaching this cabin, it clearly was not gentle. The noise faded, leaving only the rustle of wind. No riders appeared. No voices carried through the pines. Maybe it had been a deer moving through underbrush, or maybe something else watching from the tree line. He stayed still until the forest fell silent. Only then did he lower his shoulders and turn back to the girl. She stood in the doorway with uneven breathing, as if she thought someone had followed her here. He studied her small face, pale from fear and hunger. She had not eaten properly in days. He could see that from the way her knees shook, how her collarbone showed sharply beneath her skin. The thought of a child alone in the frontier wilderness unsettled him more than the noise in the trees. Few survived long, with no shelter, no food, and no one to guard them. He took a step forward, but moved slowly so she wouldn't run. He reached into his pouch and pulled out a small strip of dried meat. He placed it on the porch near the door, instead of handing it directly to her, giving her the choice. She stared at it with hesitation, then at him. When he stepped back, she finally crouched and picked it up with trembling hands. Her first bite was small, as if she feared losing the piece if she ate too fast. While she ate, he walked to the edge of the clearing and looked at the ridgeline. Smoke rose far off to the east, thin and barely visible. Not camp smoke, more like the fading trail of a distant fire. He wondered if settlers or hunters had passed through earlier. If they were looking for the girl, someone might return. Yet the cabin looked untouched. She acted like she feared being found more than being lost. When she finished eating, she leaned against the doorframe and watched him carefully. Something shifted in her eyes, something like trust, though still guarded. He approached only far enough to sit on a log near her. They rested in silence for a while. The sun began to drop low, painting the grass in warm gold. The shadows stretched longer across the yard, pulling the cabin deeper into darkness. He finally asked her where she came from. She lowered her gaze, twisting her fingers in the fabric of her dress. Her answer came slow and broken. She spoke of a homestead across the ridge, a small one, not part of a big town. Her family raised a few goats and grew corn along the creek. They had been there only a short time, long enough for her to remember warm evenings by the fire and mornings filled with birdsong, but not long enough to be safe. She spoke of someone coming one night of shouting, horses, smoke, and running until she could not hear her family anymore. She wasn't sure if they survived or if she simply escaped alone. The Apache man listened without interruption. He didn't ask too many questions because her voice shook with each memory. He had seen similar stories across the plains and valleys. In this land, danger did not always ride with one tribe or one army. Sometimes it came from outlaws or desperate men chasing land and power. Sometimes it came from feuds between ranchers. Sometimes it came without reason at all. She asked if he knew the people who might have done it. He shook his head. The frontier held too many shadows, too many tracks that vanished in the night. He told her he did not come to this cabin to hunt, or track, or fight. She seemed confused by his words, not sure why he had come at all. He didn't answer her right away, because the truth still felt heavy in his throat. He had come to die, to fade quietly. Yet saying it out loud felt wrong now, especially with her staring up at him as if he were her only anchor. The light faded fast, and the woods turned dark. Crickets began to sing. The girl stepped back inside the cabin as night settled in, but she didn't close the door. She watched him from the shadowed doorway like she needed him near to feel safe. He built a small fire outside, not for warmth, but for protection. Fire kept predators away and signaled that someone was here, awake, and not easy prey. He sat with his back straight, staring into the flames. The girl eventually came out and sat on the steps, knees tucked beneath her. She looked at him again and asked why he chose this place. His jaw tightened, and he looked away. He didn't want to tell her that he had chosen this cabin to end his journey. She wouldn't understand, or worse, she might understand too well. He simply said he needed a place where no one would find him. She lowered her head, fingers drawing circles in the dust. She said quietly that she came here for the same reason, only she didn't want to die. She just didn't want to be found by whoever took her family. Her voice cracked, and she leaned her forehead against her knees. The weight of her small words struck him hard, deeper than he expected. Their silence held a strange bond. Two lost souls hiding from different kinds of endings. As the fire crackled, the forest shifted again. A distant horse cried out, sharp and quick. The girl's breath caught, and she froze. The man rose slowly, eyes narrowing toward the tree line. The sound faded, but he stayed standing. He scanned the dark ridge for movement. He saw nothing. But the cry had not been a wild animal. It had been a human horse call, one used to signal others. Someone was out there. He returned to the fire, but did not sit. The girl asked in a barely audible whisper if they had come for her. He didn't answer because he did not know. He told her instead to stay close to the cabin at dawn and not go beyond the clearing until he understood what was happening. She nodded and pulled her thin blanket around her shoulders. The fire burned until embers glowed red. He stayed awake long after she fell asleep by the doorway. His thoughts drifted between memories and the strange feeling building in his chest. He had come here seeking the end, but now his body stood ready to defend life again. Something deep inside refused to let danger come for the girl without resistance. When the first light touched the horizon, he walked into the trees to search for tracks. Dew clung to the grass, and the air smelled sweet and sharp. He moved without sound, reading the earth carefully. Near a fallen pine, he found what he feared, fresh hoofprints pressed into soft soil, not far from where he first heard the sound. Someone had been watching the clearing from the woods, close enough to see the cabin and perhaps the girl. He followed the tracks only far enough to see they headed north. Out. Whoever rode through passed by quietly, but not without purpose. Maybe they were scouts. Maybe pursuers. Maybe wanderers who knew nothing of the girl? But his instincts told him the woods were not empty. When he returned to the cabin, the girl stood outside waiting, clutching her dress. She asked if he found anything. He did not share every detail. He simply told her they needed to stay cautious. For the first time in many seasons, he felt purpose rising again, not because he wanted it, but because something fragile depended on him. The world had taken much from him, yet now it placed something unfinished in his path. He stood with the morning sun warming his back and looked at the cabin not as a place of ending, but as a place where fate had taken a different turn. The girl looked up at him with tired eyes, waiting for guidance. He still didn't know where her family was, who hunted them, or why she survived alone. But he knew one thing: he could not leave her. Not yet. He turned toward the woods once more, sensing that whoever passed through might return. The cabin that once promised silence now held too many questions, too many ghosts of the night before. And somewhere beyond the ridge, answers were moving closer, carried on hoofprints, shadows, and memories that refused to stay buried. The frontier was not done with them. Morning light reached through the cracks in the cabin walls, laying long lines across the dusty floor. The girl sat near the doorway while the Apache man checked the edges of the clearing carefully. He counted the birds that flew up from the trees, watching how they scattered. Nature always warned those who knew how to listen. Today the forest seemed unsettled, like something had passed through that didn't belong. The girl watched him with wide eyes, trying to understand what he was searching for. She had slept only in short bursts through the night, waking from every snap of a twig, afraid someone would storm the cabin and drag her away. She held her arms around herself, trying to push away the cold feeling that still clung to her, even as sunlight warmed the ground. He returned to the porch, crouched near her. He asked again if she remembered anything else from that night. She shook her head at first, but then her voice came soft and cracked with emotion. She remembered men arguing in the dark. She remembered rifles pointed through the windows. She remembered her mother pushing her outside, telling her to run toward the trees and not look back. She didn't know why anyone would come after her family. They had little, barely enough to keep themselves fed. The Apache man listened with quiet patience, trying to piece together what could have happened. He asked if they had any trouble with settlers or ranchers. She said no. Her father always avoided arguments. He gave respect where it was due. He never fought with anyone. Her mother kept to herself. They were not rich, not bold, not loud. Just simple people trying to live. Sometimes those were the ones who suffered most. She looked up at the Apache man and asked if people ever did cruel things for no reason. He answered honestly, yes, they did. He told her that the land out here was changing very fast. Men were claiming what did not belong to them. They fought over water, over a strip of grazing land, even over rumors. Some blamed others for things they never did. Some believed the law was too slow, so they made their own. Fear could twist any man into violence. Greed could turn a friend into an enemy. She hugged her knees tighter, absorbing his words with a child's uneasy understanding. All she knew was that she couldn't go home. Not yet. Maybe not ever. He looked out across the yard again. The silence no longer comforted him. It fenced him in like a trap. He felt eyes in the trees, even if he could not see them. He had wanted to come here and fade from the world. Now he felt the world slowly creeping back toward him. All day they worked to strengthen the cabin. He fixed loose boards, repaired the door frame, and gathered branches and stones to hide their footprints around the clearing. The girl helped where she could, though her hands were small and uncertain. Still, she tried, and he let her, because it kept her mind busy and gave her a sense of purpose. While they gathered wood from the edge of the forest, she asked him about his past. She wanted to know why he walked alone. He paused before answering, leaning against a fallen tree. He told her he had once been a father, a husband. He did not say how he lost them. The memory still hurt too much. He only whispered that they were gone, taken by the same changes that swept these lands. The kind of changes that cared nothing for the hearts they crushed. The girl stepped closer, gentle in her silence. she did not push him for more. In her eyes, he saw understanding that should not belong to a child. She too had felt lost here at her world. They carried the logs back to the cabin and built a small pile near the porch for the night's fire. But even with the sun high above them, the man could not shake the feeling of looming danger. The hoof prints he found pointed to someone watching, someone curious or cautious, someone who might return. Later that afternoon, while the girl napped inside, he walked deeper into the woods, with his senses sharp. He found more signs. A broken branch, fresh. Grass bent where someone crouched in the dark. A cigarette stub in the dirt, something no hunter would leave behind. Whoever had watched them was not from a nearby tribe or a scouting party. This smelled like town trouble, like men who believed anything could be claimed if they were willing to kill for it. He returned to the clearing more alert than ever. The sky had begun to cloud over, turning the light gray and uneasy. The girl woke just as thunder rolled far off, rumbling like an approaching army. She looked frightened again. He told her thunderstorms were just the sky speaking loudly and that they would be safe inside. As night came, fire crackled under the porch roof. Rain dripped from the leaves. Thunder shook the cabin walls every few minutes. The girl sat wrapped in a blanket by the door, watching the Apache man sharpen a hunting knife with measured strokes. It wasn't a threat. It was preparation. She asked him if he thought the men who attacked her home would come here. He took a long breath. He said he did not know. But if they did, they would not take her easily. Her eyes glistened, a mix of fear and comfort in his promise. She then asked a question he didn't expect. She asked if he believed people ever found light after losing everything. He put down the knife slowly. He had once believed the answer was no, that after losing his family, his spirit would always walk in darkness. But now, sitting beside a child who needed him, he wasn't so sure. He told her he didn't have the answer yet, but maybe the land still had something left for both of them. The firelight flickered across his scarred skin and her pale face. It cast shadows that danced like memories trying to return. They both watched the flames while the storm roared outside. At one point, the girl leaned a little closer, not touching him, but close enough that their fears felt shared in the quiet moment between thunderclaps. He heard something besides the storm. Hooves again, slow and cautious, moving closer from the north. He stood up fast. The girl gasped and scrambled into the cabin. He motioned for silence and stepped into the rain, eyes narrowed. He could barely see through the downpour in the darkness, but the sound was unmistakable. A rider, maybe two. He stayed near the shadows of the porch, watching the tree line, breathing steady. Lightning flashed, and for a brief second, he saw a horse's silhouette. Then it vanished behind thick brush. The hooves grew louder, then stopped. The girl peeked from the doorway, heart beating so loud she could hear it in her ears. She asked what he saw. He didn't answer. Instead, he raised his hand to tell her to stay low. Another flash of lightning brightened the clearing. This time he saw figures on horseback. One, then two, maybe more behind them. They did not approach, only watched from the trees, letting the storm hide their faces. The riders were close enough to sense the fire, close enough to see the cabin was no longer empty. He tightened his grip on the knife. The storm raged, but the real danger stood silent in the dark. The riders turned their horses slowly and disappeared, back into the forest without a sound. The silence they left behind felt worse than their presence. It meant they needed no quick attack. They were patient enough to wait, to study, to strike when darkness was thickest or fear at its highest. He stepped back onto the porch with rain dripping from his hair. The girl stared up at him with trembling lips. She asked if they were safe. He didn't lie. He told her safety would not come easy. Inside the cabin, the fire dimmed, shadows growing longer. The storm eased, but the fear did not. The Apache man sat by the doorway through the night, knife ready, eyes wide open. He watched the border of trees where the riders had vanished. He listened to every shift in the wind. The girl tried to sleep again, but her rest was thin and restless. She looked to him often, needing the sight of his presence to calm her shaking heart. He had come to this place to die with no purpose left. Now he sat alive with a purpose he had not asked for. Somewhere in the dark, men searched for the girl. And somewhere in his heart, new strength began to grow. Rooted in her need for him, the cabin was no longer a place for endings. It had become a battleground of fate, where two lives haunted by loss stood together, waiting for whatever approached through the trees. Night slipped into morning without rest. When the sun finally pushed through the wet clouds, the world outside the cabin looked calm again, almost peaceful. But the Apache man knew that calm was just a thin cover stretched over trouble. The hooves, the silhouettes in the lightning, the cigarette stub in the dirt, every sign pointed to one truth. Someone was watching them, and they were getting closer. The girl stepped out onto the porch with sleepy eyes. Her hair was tangled from a restless night, and she wrapped her blanket tightly around her shoulders. She looked at him sitting near the dying fire, still awake, still alert. She asked if he had slept at all. He shook his head. She asked softly if the men would come back. He answered only with a quiet nod. Her face tightened with fear, but she didn't cry. Somewhere in the past days, she had learned to hold her tears inside. Like someone who had already lost too much to waste anything, he stood, stretched his tired muscles, and walked toward the edge of the clearing. The girl followed a step behind, keeping close as if distance itself might swallow her. The forest breathed cool morning air, birds singing as if nothing had happened. But he felt eyes in the shadows again, the kind that hid their shape until the moment they stepped out with rifles raised. He told the girl they needed supplies. They could not stay in the cabin with only scraps of meat and water from a muddy stream. Worse, if the riders returned with more men, they might burn the cabin or circle it until night fell again. He needed to find out who they were, where they came from, and whether they hunted her or simply wandered through by chance. The girl hesitated when he said he had to venture out. She didn't want him to leave. She feared being alone. He placed a steady hand on her shoulder, promising he would not go far and would return before dusk. She finally agreed, but only after he showed her where to hide if anyone came near. Before leaving, he gave her a small flint knife wrapped in leather. She held it like a fragile gift, unsure whether she should be proud or terrified that she had a reason to need it. He walked into the woods with slow, careful steps, leaving the cabin behind like a quiet ghost. The trees swallowed him quickly, shadows stretching between trunks like tall, silent guards. He followed the trail worn by the hooves from the night before, moving north along damp soil and broken brush. The air still smelled of rain and wet bark. Hours passed as he tracked the riders. He found where they stopped to water their horses, where one of them dismounted to check the clearing. Eventually, the tracks led toward a rocky ridge overlooking the river. From above, he spotted smoke curling over the trees. A camp. He crouched low, heart pounding, and eased forward through thick shrubs. The ridge gave him the perfect view. 4 men sat around a small fire. Their clothes looked worn, not like soldiers, but not like settlers either. They carried rifles strapped to their saddles and pistols hanging low on their belts. Their horses were healthy, well-fed. These were not starving wanderers. They were organized men, moving with purpose. One of them spoke loudly, frustrated. He complained about losing the trail of the girl and said she must have died in the woods. Another argued that she was worth catching, that their employer wanted her found. The Apache man listened closely, hands tightening into fists. Someone had ordered her taken. Someone with power. Someone who believed the girl mattered more than just another helpless settler child. He leaned closer, trying to hear more, but a twig snapped under his boot. One of the men turned sharply, eyes scanning the ridge. The Apache man backed away, breath held, heart racing. The men didn't climb after him, but one of them aimed his rifle toward the trees as if waiting for another sound. He stayed low and retreated quietly until he could no longer see the smoke. When he finally exhaled, he realized he now carried something heavier than suspicion. He carried answers, but the answers only deepened the danger. Someone powerful wanted the girl alive, and men who obeyed orders for money were already close. When he returned to the clearing, the sun was dipping low, painting the grass orange. The girl stood where he left her, scanning the woods with anxious eyes. When she saw him, she ran forward with shaky relief. He knelt to meet her, placing a hand on her shoulder, grounding her trembling voice. She asked if he found anything. He told her what he heard, though carefully. He didn't want to drown her in fear, but she deserved truth. She listened, eyes growing wider with every detail. When he said someone wanted her found, she clutched her blanket tighter, whispering that she did not understand why. She had no wealth, no secrets. Nothing that could matter to men on horseback. He stared into her eyes and saw something she hadn't realized yet. Sometimes children were wanted for reasons that had nothing to do with them. Sometimes they were leverage. Sometimes they were witness to things others wanted buried. As night fell again, he decided they could no longer wait in the cabin. They needed a plan. Staying still meant dying quietly. Moving meant facing the truth, even if that truth opened wounds. While the girl slept inside, he sat outside sharpening a spear and listening to the way the wind carried sound through the trees. The woods no longer felt like empty wilderness. They felt like a battlefield tightening around them, near midnight. The girl woke from a nightmare, stepping out to sit beside him. The firelight warmed her face, but her eyes held shadows. She asked him again why he helped her. He looked into the flames for a long moment before answering. He told her that he once believed life was over for him, that he came to this cabin to let his spirit return to the earth. But now he understood that crossing paths with her was not accident or punishment. It was a call, a test, a turning of fate he did not see coming. She didn't speak for a while. When she finally did, her voice was quiet but firm. She said she didn't want to be just someone he protected. She wanted to find out why her family was attacked, who ordered it, and what they wanted from her. She wanted to stand, not just hide. He looked at her, seeing not just a frightened child, but the beginning of strength. She had lost everything, yet something inside her still reached forward, instead of breaking backward. He promised they would find answers together, but before he could say more, the cracking of branches echoed from the dark again. This time there was no storm to hide behind, no rain to blur shapes. Torches flickered through the trees. The riders had returned, not watching from a distance. Approaching, the Apache man rose to his feet with slow determination, gripping the spear in one hand and the knife in the other. The girl stepped back into the cabin doorway, her breath shallow and uneven. Horses moved into the clearing, silhouettes forming under the moonlight. Shadows of rifles. Shadows of men. Their voices carried low, confident. Like hunters closing in on prey they believed cornered. The Apache man planted his feet in the grass, shoulders set, ready for whatever came next. He did not want to shed blood, but he would not run, not this time. The girl watched from behind him, clutching the knife he had given her, eyes filled with fear and hope and a spark of the courage she didn't know she had. The riders spread out, surrounding the cabin slowly. One voice called out, saying they wanted the girl alive and unharmed. They claimed they didn't want trouble. They claimed they had rightful business. But behind their words, he heard the truth. They were not here to negotiate. They were here to take. The firelight between them flickered wildly as the wind picked up again. The clearing held its breath, waiting to see which way fate would break. He shifted his stance, body tense like a tightened bowstring. The night had turned into the edge of a storm again. Only this time, no thunder rolled. Across the sky, the storm stood in the clearing, with steel and intent and the moment. Just before everything broke was the heaviest silence either of them had ever known. The clearing held stillness like a held breath. Moonlight spilled across the grass, lighting the faces of the riders just enough to show hard lines and colder intentions. The Apache man stepped forward, keeping his body between the cabin and the girl. He held the spear low but firm. He did not shout, did not threaten, did not show fear. His calm unsettled the men more than any weapon could have. The man at the front raised his hand to signal the others to hold. He tried to speak in a smooth tone, claiming they were there to collect the girl for her own protection, claiming the land her family settled belonged to a powerful man who had invested money into it. He insisted her parents left debts behind. He said the girl was simply being taken as a ward until everything was settled. The words sounded practiced, cleaned up for lawmen or courts, but the Apache man heard the truth beneath. These were hired hands doing someone else's bidding. Their concern wasn't justice. Their concern was control. He stepped forward another pace, and the riders stiffened. One lifted his rifle slightly, not pointed, but ready. The leader warned him that interfering would bring trouble. The Apache man said quietly that trouble was already here, and he would not hand over a child to men who rode in the night like hunters. The tension snapped. One rider kicked his horse forward in anger, charging straight at him. The Apache man ducked low, using the spear to turn the horse sideways without harming it. The rider lost balance and fell into the grass. The others shouted, and horses pawed the earth, ready to rush in. The girl grabbed the doorframe, heart racing. Watching the world break open in front of her, the leader yelled to hold fire, ordering them to take the Apache man alive. They wanted the girl uninjured, but the man protecting her was just an obstacle to drag out of the way. 2 riders dismounted and rushed forward. The Apache man met them with precise strikes, disabling rather than injuring. He fought not with anger, but with purpose. He had spent years in battles he did not want. This was not the same thing. This fight mattered because it was not for land, not for revenge, not for pride. It was to protect someone who still had a future. The girl watched in awe and terror. Clutching the knife he gave her, though she never had to use it, she could feel something change in the air, like the world itself was pushing back against. The men who came to steal her life away, the leader finally lost patience and raised his rifle. The Apache man saw the movement and dropped to one knee, just as the shot fired. The bullet hit the porch post, splintering wood. The girl fell backward, covering her ears. The sound echoed across the clearing before the leader could fire again. One of his own men grabbed his arm, shouting that this wasn't part of the deal, that they weren't supposed to kill anyone. The leader snarled and shoved him away, furious that his authority was questioned. That small argument gave the Apache man just enough time to rush forward. He tackled the leader off his horse, knocking the rifle into the dirt. The 2 rolled across the grass, fighting hand to hand. The leader was skilled, desperate, and fueled by anger. But the Apache man fought with something deeper than anger, something steady and grounded. He pinned the leader to the ground and held the knife to his collar, forcing him still. Silence fell again, broken only by the sound of horses snorting and men breathing hard. The riders hesitated, unsure whether to fight or flee. The Apache man could have ended the leader right there, but he loosened his grip instead and rose to his feet. He told the men to leave the land, to ride back to whoever sent them, and say that the girl was under protection now. No one would claim her again. The leader rose slowly, humiliated and furious, but he saw something in the man's eyes that stopped him from trying again. Something unwavering, something unbroken. He looked at the girl then, and for a moment his expression changed from rage to calculation. Like he finally realized she was not just a runaway child. She was the last piece of land her family had lived on, the last witness to whatever deals had been made in the shadows. She was proof. The leader wiped dirt from his coat and mounted his horse. He warned that this wasn't over, but his voice lacked the power it held earlier. The men followed him reluctantly, disappearing into the trees without firing another shot. When the last hoofbeat faded, the clearing finally released its breath. The Apache man turned to the girl. She stood shaking, tears finally spilling down her face. She rushed forward and held on to him like someone holding on to the last steady thing in a collapsing world. He rested his hand gently on her back, letting her cry, letting her release everything she had been holding in. They sat by the fire for a long time afterward, both exhausted, both quiet. She asked him if they would come back. He said maybe, but not soon. Those men were used to easy victories. Tonight they learned that some battles were not worth the cost. The days that followed shifted slowly from fear to rebuilding. The Apache man repaired the porch, fixed the windows, and sealed the roof so rain would no longer drip inside. The girl helped plant herbs behind the cabin, learning how to grow things the way his people once did near riverbeds. The land no longer felt like a grave. It felt like the beginning of something new. He taught her how to watch the land, how to read the wind, how to spot danger before it came. She learned fast, not because she wanted to fight, but because she wanted to live. Weeks passed, and smoke from distant towns no longer carried the scent of pursuit. Travelers passed through, but none came asking about a missing girl. News eventually reached them through a passing trapper that the cattle baron who claimed her family's land lost his holdings after a legal dispute. His hired men scattered to other territories. Whatever threat remained faded like old thunder. One evening, as the sun set across the clearing, the girl stood beside the Apache man and asked if he still wished to die here. He looked at the cabin, at the growing garden, at the path worn through the grass by her small footsteps. He told her he once thought his life ended long ago, but now he understood that sometimes broken pieces find new purpose when joined with someone else's. She smiled softly, saying she didn't know what tomorrow would hold, but she didn't feel alone anymore. He nodded, feeling the same truth settle quietly inside him. Their futures were no longer separate. The land held both of them now. In time, the cabin no longer looked abandoned. Smoke curled from the chimney each night. Fresh wood patched the old planks. The clearing was filled with sounds of tools, water buckets, birds returning to new life. The place that once felt like an ending became a small home where two lost souls built something steady from the ruins of their pasts. The Apache man did not become her father, nor did she become a burden. They became companions in survival, bound by shared loss and newfound hope. He gave her protection and guidance. She gave him meaning when he believed he had none left. The frontier did not grow quieter, but they faced it together. And every morning when sunlight carried across the grass, he no longer stood waiting for his last breath. He greeted another day ready to live. The cabin had been bought as a place to die instead. It became the place where both of them finally began to live again.